Welcome to episode 157 of Ring Talk, the now weekly, because we've done it 2 weeks in a row, Goodwin Boxing show. Myself, Martin Theobald, and with me, head of boxing at Goodwin Boxing. Steve, how are you?
I'm all good. I'm all good. All getting ready now for the big march. But yeah, it's all boxing is all getting ready to start, isn't it? There's lots of good things happening in March, not just with us, but just generally in boxing. So looking forward to it.
Yeah, we sort of ended last week saying about you're sort of reinvigorated with boxing as a whole. So yeah, March is a good month, not just for Goodwin Boxing, but um, sort of your shows plus your fighters plus boxing generally is in a good place, I think.
Yeah, it's good. And yeah, we've got lots going on, lots of new signings. Yeah, so it's really buzzing. So it's some weird and wonderful things happening in the world of boxing, but we just let that all crack on and we just carry on doing our own thing.
Yeah, and you've got weird and wonderful things that you're involved in that over time will come out and we'll hear about them. But for now, we have to keep stum.
Exactly.
Um, but in the world of boxing this week, it's been a relatively quiet one outside of two press conferences for Taylor Catterall. I know we sort of touched on the fight last week. I got some feedback from somebody very close and involved in the fight who
Oh no.
didn't necessarily agree with my view of the fight, but I stand by it. Doesn't do an awful lot for me, irrespective of what that person may want to try and convince me otherwise. Two press conferences this week. What do you make of them?
Um,
And do you think it's excessive to have two press conferences for this fight, or the
well, I
fact there's
mean,
the England
you could have.
Scotland rivalry?
The thing was, what they did, one in Scotland, one in was it Did they do it in Manchester or what? Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
and then they do the fight in Leeds.
yeah, it's sort of a bit odd. And if you look at it, there wasn't a massive turnout. When you saw the crowd for the Manchester one, there wasn't if you look at it, no matter what you try and say, wasn't a big turnout for something that was free. And it wasn't actually really a press conference because the press weren't there as such. It was more about a crowd cheering, chanting, shouting. So what do I make of it? It builds up the fight. It makes for those that are not in, a lot of people that are not interested, maybe I'm not saying you, but it'll make some people more interested in it. So I guess anything that helps to build up a fight is good. So, but yeah, I mean, really, you watch one, you watch the second one. They say the same things twice.
Yeah, yeah. So I'm not a massive fan of repeating the same thing one day after the other. There's a limited amount. I mean, let's be honest. Josh Taylor isn't the most likable person. He comes, and I had this conversation with Miles Shinkwin on Twitter earlier. Actually, I 100% respect Josh Taylor as a fighter. I think he's a brilliant fighter. Might be on the wane a little bit, but I love his ruthlessness, his spitefulness, his aggression within the ring. He carries himself the same way out of the ring. That doesn't make him come over as a great person sometimes. Um, but all of those traits have done him well sort of throughout his career. And I've been a big fan of his career. Not necessarily of the person, but of the career. And Jack Catterall sort of he's not the most not the most sort of charismatic and engaging individual, but I think they've done a good job of getting Sam Jones in there. I've said it for years, sort of going back to the Dubois days, no, sorry, the Joe Joyce days. Sam Jones is the ideal mouthpiece for certain people. Sort of if you haven't got the charisma and the attitude and the ability to garner headlines yourself, use someone else like they do in WWF. Sort of you go or WWE these days, you go and get somebody else in who's a mouthpiece to get the headlines. I don't have an issue with that. I think it's all right.
Yeah, fair. I mean, it will attract more attention. I mean, it's going to attract attention doing it in both locations. Eddie Hearn's a good promoter. He knows what works. So I presume it's yeah. I mean, it's not going to inspire you. To me, as I said the same thing last week, I think it's a good fight. I think it's a fight that needs to happen, and I will watch it. But do I expect it to be a great spectacle as a fight? The answer to that is no. I think it will be a pretty ropey fight. Um, because I think it will be pretty much pretty, when you have second fights on the back of the first fights, I think it could be a little bit scrappy, messy. I don't think it'd be a great spectacle, but I think the build up will be better than the fight. But I think the fight should happen because I think the first fight result was a disgrace. So that's it. But I don't think it'd be a great fight to watch.
Yeah, but all of that said, I do like the build up to it. I like the fact that they're
Hmm.
investing money into building a fight. It's good. That's how it should be.
Yeah, they're
Um,
promoting. It's called promoting for a reason. They're promoting, so
yeah,
it's great. And I don't know. I'm sort of the opposite to you. Whether I think it'd be a great fight or not, I'll watch it if I'm in. I'll watch
yeah,
it.
exactly. Sort of, no offense to Jack Catterall, he's a good fighter. He's sort of a world level fighter. He's not an exciting or interesting fighter.
Hmm.
His fights typically aren't that exciting to watch. But
That's
who
fair.
knows? Maybe with a bit of spite behind it this time and a bit of
Yeah.
hatred, as they're sort of painting it as, then maybe it will be interesting. But moving on from that, there's not really an awful lot that's happened in the world of boxing this week. So we're going to jump into some questions that we've got through. So I've got these lined up.
Before we do that, a couple of bits of news for Goodwin boxers.
Go on then.
Lauren Parker will be defending her European title against we've had a change of heart how we're going to play this, and we've agreed terms with the Italians to bring her over to the UK back end of summer, but we're just still working on some details. So Lauren's going to defend a European title now against Stephanie De Silva in London in the back end of summer. So that's good news.
So this is where we touched on last week. It was sort of a mandatory that was called very soon after winning the title that wasn't really anticipated, and you were weighing up the options.
Yeah, so what we've done is we've spoken to the Italians manager and said, look, this isn't a fight we're ready for at the moment, so how about if we work together? And he's a great guy to deal with, and so we've just pushed it back a bit. We've extended the deadline, and that will be better for everybody concerned. So that's the plan. We just haven't sorted out date, venue, but we've agreed in principle what we're going to do. So
How does
that's
that work, right? From a layman's perspective, because I'm sure people at home would have the same sort of question. You get a mandatory stuck on you against Italian lady that you probably don't know an awful lot about. Lauren probably doesn't know an awful lot about. And now you've got to go and make a fight.
Hmm.
How do you go about making contact with a manager that you've probably never spoken to
Well,
before
I
in a
have,
language?
but no, it was quite handy because
Ah,
when Lauren won, beat Giuseppina Di Stefano, it's the same manager again who's got
right.
this girl. So we had a good relationship with him at the time. He was very good to deal with. So I pick up the phone, speak to him. We have a period where the EBU give us to make an arrangement. And if we don't come to a mutual arrangement, then it goes to purse bids. So what we did is we sat together and we came up with an arrangement and an agreement that in principle we're going to try and do this. And so he agreed. So purse bids were withdrawn.
Full disclosure, we're back with Steve in a different room because we've had some recording issues. So hopefully this is stitched together all right. But that's by the by, we're talking before, and quite where this gets stitched together, we'll find out about how you go about making a fight with somebody in Italy, and you've got a sort of pre-existing relationship with the manager, but now you've got to go and agree terms and sort of work out a date. How do you sort of go about doing that?
So I just sent him a text. He contacted me about 3 weeks ago and said to me, "Oh, we're mandatory for you." And at the time, Lauren was on a cruise. I was in Mexico. So I sent him back. I said, "Look, I'm away. Lauren's on a cruise. Let's talk when I get back." So I made contact with him last week. Said, "Can we chat at the weekend?" And then on Sunday, I said, "Give me a call when you're free." He rings me. We have a debate. I said, "Look, we don't really want to go to purse bids. Um, so let's come up with some sort of generic solution that stops it going to purse bids and gives us time to stitch something together between us." So the fight was supposed to take place by June, which isn't really suitable for anybody. So we just sort of deferred it to September and August, September, and we'll finalise dates and everything else later on. So it now means that Lauren can have a warm up, the other lady can have a warm up, and they can clash for it in the summertime. And
So
that's really
Lauren will fight before then.
very possibly. I mean, the Italians fighting in March, and Lauren may fight in May. We'll speak to her about that. Something we'll delay, and then they'll box in the summertime, August, September time, I'd imagine. So that's really what it is. We wanted the Shannon Ryan fight. We've been chasing the Shannon Ryan fight, but I think we'll be waiting forever. Whatever the scenario is, it's quite clear that Shannon Ryan doesn't fancy Lauren Parker, so they're sticking with Emma Dolan. I know it's a British and Commonwealth, but we could have done British and European. I'm sure we could have got step aside. But they had no interest in Lauren for Shannon Ryan. And I think the reason they got no interest is the bubble. I think she'll burst that bubble. So that's really where we are. So Shannon Ryan is not on the agenda. And we move on to the Italian and then move forward to bigger and better things afterwards. Hopefully, God willing, that she comes through that fight.
And what else is the news for Goodwin boxing fighters this week?
So Zach Chelli will be boxing Callum Simpson. That will be happening. It's his mandatory, so that's going to be happening. Won't be happening until end of May onwards, possibly June time, because obviously Zach's got Ramadan to deal with. But that's a fight I love. I love that fight. I really love that fight. It's the solid person who's been there, seen there, and done it, but still improving against the hype job.
Yep. And I know you've talked about that fight before as well as one that you fancy for Zach.
Oh my God! History is littered with hype with these guys that have not got any. Like, it actually was a top class amateur. Callum Simpson was a nothing amateur. Callum Simpson has beaten nobody that Zach Chelli wouldn't have done the same to, if not better. It's just a hype machine. It's a hype machine. And I think Callum Simpson's a good fighter. But no, he's not. He's not winning this. He's not winning this.
I saw you were out for dinner with Zach and Zach Senior as well.
Yeah, we went out to our our favourite horn, Little Italy in Frith Street, Soho. You've been there, and no, we spent a nice evening out, and we were chatting about what was going on, and we're extremely confident with this fight. This is the fight that we win, and then we've had meetings about what happens when we win this fight, and this is Callum Simpson, good fighter, but just watch the fight when he fights anybody who throws back. Just watch it. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to see what's going to happen here. Really doesn't. Really doesn't. And yeah, I think you'll see a very impressive Zach Chelli performance, and they can hype something all they like, but he's fought nobody, absolutely nobody.
Yeah, the only time I've been to that place down in Little Italy, I was hammered as well.
It was a good night, though. It was a good.
It was a good night, and I was fucking wasted. Which is how my camera looks right now. Let me make sure that comes back on. Yeah, so moving on, we got some questions. One came through late last week, so after we'd recorded, from my friend Terry asking what are the plans for Yusuf Kamari in 2024. I know you sort of vaguely answered it on Twitter.
So officially, he's in a final eliminator for the English title. But things can change. And I'm working on something at the moment. We're working on something that should happen, but I can't say it until it does happen. And I'm hoping we'll be able to announce it next week. But let me tell you, Yusuf Kamari is delighted, as he says, to be back home where we're making good moves for him. And he'll be getting his big opportunities now that it's done properly.
Real. Right, we'll move on to the questions we received this week. Robert Chapman, good old Camden caretaker, Robert Chapman. It now goes by Robert Michael Chapman, not just Robbie. Sounds a lot more full. Are the screens coming back? He needs to get on Boxmania.
He needs to go Boxmania because we have got the screens at Boxmania. Let me tell you the logistics about the screens. So we used to put screens up every show, and it costs a lot of money. And we used to put 15, 16 fights on the show. And we could manage to do it by having the extra fights. It would enable us each show to put the screens up. And then the board restricted the whole of boxing to 12 fights, but decided that was only 10 fights at your call. So now your margins are so squeezed, and you often don't even get 10 fights. So to put screens up every time will just mean we're guaranteeing to lose money every time. And we just can't do it. You just cannot afford to do that on other shows. And People that put screens up every time, you they're just very lucky that they've got money coming in from other sources. But you can't do it from the money that you earn from selling tickets at your call. You just can't. So what we do is we do the Box Mania shows and we go all singing, all dancing with the lighting. But the Box Mania shows will have everything thrown at it. But we can only do that on one show a quarter. So that's why if you get on the big shows, you'll get all of that, and that's really what we're aiming to do. But we can't logistically afford without making boxers sell an infinity amount of tickets extra to pay for it. And I think boxers have got enough as a stretch to do that. And we're told that we give a fairer deal than most other people, but we're not going to put these things up at the cost of the boxers.
Yeah, and Robbie, it's an incentive for you to get back on the winning streak, go back in the home corner. It's still there, Robbie. I'm sure of it. It's always there.
Yeah,
If you fancy the sort of hassle and aggro that comes with it, of course.
of
But there
course.
we go. One of the best road warriors,
Oh, for
journeyman.
sure, for sure.
Um, kind of linked in sort of part to your answer there is a question from Tim Field. Now, Tim, I love you. I hope Devon's well, but you need to be more succinct with your questions, my friend. So I'm going to have to abridge this somewhat. Um, Steve, with so many YouTube channels filming and producing their own sporting or media output, what prevents you, at a particular venue, for instance, York Hall, from filming and streaming live? I have a couple of theories, and then he's sort of put a lot of information about what those are. Um, but I think it probably links back to what you were saying there about if you've got money coming in from somewhere else, and that's all well because it covers the ticket money and you can stream it then for free, but you are predicated by ticket money.
And let's start for starters. York Hall, if you stream it, won another 2.5 grand.
Do they?
Yeah,
What, for Wi-Fi?
yeah.
They need a better Wi-Fi provider.
So it's 2.5 grand. So all of a sudden, your hire fee goes up 2.5 grand. Who's paying for it? So it's done for those. I say it again and again. It's done for those that really have other that it's. I mean, our job. So let's go back to what we're doing. We are building our fighters on our shows to elevate them to televised platforms and develop their careers. It's not about me going in front of a camera to make out underdogs, doodahs, and in front of not many viewers, in front of, you know, it doesn't make sense. If you had a big, for example, somebody who you thought was really reputable in the country and it was being filmed. So I'll give an example. Boxing News. Let's say Boxing News decide to live stream an event and they decide that they're going to give it some boost from the publication. Then that's slightly different because you would get the publicity that may cover the additional cost of getting people to your venue than it would be elsewhere. If you're just plonking it on a YouTube channel that doesn't do that, then that would be pointless. By the way, I'm not saying Boxing News are going to be broadcasting. I'm just using that as an example. But just to put it out live, spend 2,500 more, spend production costs when you're already struggling to break even. And you do have to say why are people giving their content for free if they've got no, because you're not going to get, boxers are not going to get additional sponsors for most of this live streaming because the viewing figures are not good enough. So why? Why? And that's a subject I could discuss half an hour about and probably get myself shot. But the point is, make people very unhappy. So as to why things are streamed and why things are done in boxing, there's a lot of information and detail as to why things are done. But when you are doing what we are doing, which is generically funding a boxing show through our hard slog of selling tickets ourselves, and the boxers are, you can't give away boxers' tickets away, our attendance away for nothing, for no point. It doesn't make sense. But there we go. Apart from the fact that it's a thing where you want to see yourself doing it, or it's just. But that's my view. What's your view on it?
I have a very, very, very strong view on it. It's total bollocks, anyone that's doing it. Total, utter bollocks. You ever look at the number of viewers that are ever watching it, it's normally what? If you're lucky, 1,500 people are ever watching it at one time. Now,
Mm.
okay, maybe you can say that those 1,500 drop out, and over the course of a show, you might get, let's call it 10,000, if you're lucky. If you're really lucky. No sponsor on this planet is going to give you a sort of a reasonable amount of money to offset the ticket sale loss that you'll have from it. Um, for 10,000 viewers, of which you can't guarantee they're going to see your logo or go and buy your product as a result of seeing it on a small hall streamed show. And aside from that, let's be honest, most small hall shows that are streamed, I'm a boxing fan. I would not watch a minute of them. They're sort of, the majority of the cards will be pretty poor one-sided fights, which is okay. That's a small hall show sometimes. Those shows exist. I don't want to watch them. I don't want to go out of my way, sort of set my time aside on a Saturday night to watch it on a streamed thing on my laptop or sort of plugging it in via YouTube on my TV. I've got no interest in it at all. Even if it's one sort of main event fight with two fighters I'm not really that familiar with, I don't want to watch it. I barely watch enough on sort of Sky and DAZN and such like. So no, like the small hall platform to me is a place where boxers are showcased for the future or they're showcased for their friends and family at that point. It's not something that has a mainstream appeal, and it's not something that will ever get mainstream funding to offset that loss of ticket sales.
And that's
And
been
I
our
always,
view. That's been our view the whole time. Yeah, it's been our view.
if I ever see any organisation live streaming their small hall show, I have red flags all over the place. Of which DM me if you want to know what those red flags are, because I don't want to get shot. Um, but yeah, I have very passionate views on it. From Tim, what's your top five list of exciting new prospects under your management with less than 4 or 5 bouts?
It's really difficult because I don't like doing this. Got so many. Johnny Ward, I think he's had six though. I think he's going places if he can focus. I think he's very good. There's so many. There's so many. Um,
And it's also difficult, isn't it? Because some sort of come through that you may not expect that have had 2 or 3 bouts, and some that you have high hopes for that maybe don't reach the ceiling that you'd hoped for.
really hard at that level because it's only really when you get to bout six, bout seven, you start to see because you in the first 4 or 5 bouts, you're number building. So they're not really being tested until the step ups start to happen. I think
Yeah.
it's very difficult for me to specify. I think most of the fighters I've got chances. Johnny Ward stands out because I think he's exceptional at super middleweight. Lewis Oakford at cruiserweight could make a big mark because it's a division that is wide open. He could easily come through the cruiserweight division.
And not only wide open, but they're also always looking for opponents coming up
Yeah,
because there's quite a few British sort of around that English level. Someone like a Vidal Riley, I know he's stepping up and taking on Mikel
yeah.
Lawal with a cracking fight.
Hmm.
Um, but people like that are always looking for opponents.
Yeah, I mean, there's just so many, and I could sit there and go through the resume from all the fighters, but there's just so many, and so many have got chances of breaking through. And it's just going to be those that have got more than just boxing ability, that have got determination, consistency, are going to work exceptionally hard. And that we're not going to see. So many fighters get to 5 and 6 and 0, and then they don't want it because it's going to get hard now. And then they back away. And you think you could have been really good, but they don't really have it to go that much further. So it's really hard at that level to give names that I think are there. I mean, Lewis Oakford 4-0. I know his amateur record. I know that he's a decent cruiserweight. I know that he's got massive potential. So, and I know he's really committed. So I think that's the reason I'm giving his name. But there are loads. I could give 10, 20, but I don't know yet. I don't know yet.
Yeah, and that flip side to that is somebody like a Jerome Campbell, who you wouldn't necessarily have picked out early on to have that potential to go and fight a Nick Ball and take him the distance. You wouldn't have
Yeah, no,
necessarily picked him out to sort of achieve what he's achieved thus far. Um, a cracking win last time out as well. So that sort of hidden gem that comes through over time.
yeah.
Um, Final one off this list. Steve, interested to know who you think are the future pay-per-view stars within British boxing.
Ben Whittaker, for sure. Now, if you look through the stables, if you go through the rest of the Sky stable, I can't see any. I don't think that Adam Azim is a future pay-per-view star. I just don't. Um,
I think he lacks the pop, and I know that's horrible to say because he's still young and he's developing, but I think he lacks that real ending ability.
So I think Ben Whittaker, I don't see. I mean, the rest of them, you got Karen Dubois, blah blah blah. They're not. She's not a pay per view star. So on the Sky roster, I can only think genuinely of Ben Whittaker. Now, what can happen? You can get a pay per view star because if you go back, and I'm going to use Zach as an example. Zach Chelli is nowhere near, you would say, a pay per view star. But Carl Froch wasn't a pay per view star. But if Zach develops his career and just starts beating everybody like Carl Froch does, he could end up being a pay-per-view star, as crazy as it seems. Callum Simpson, if he was as good as the hype, could end up developing to be a pay-per-view star. Don't think he will, because I think Zach Chelli derails him. But you can have one of these people that come through and become a pay-per-view star that you wouldn't think of because they just start winning.
Carl Froch was in the boxing backwaters of Satanta, sort of until
Yeah,
that Lucian Butte fight.
and that's my
And then on the
point.
back of that, Mikhail or made his career.
So that can happen.
Yeah,
So, but I think the only one that to me looks like a total utter standout is Ben Whittaker.
I agree. I think out of all of British boxing, I think he's the
Mm.
one that will carry it.
Mm.
Um, Question from John Bailey on Twitter. What are your views on the old Masters titles? Is there a place for them if they were brought back? With small hall shows needing a selling point, does this fill a gap?
So let's look back at what the Masters were. So the board had different people doing it on their own. So they would charge 250 quid for the belt and a 250 sanction fee. So there was an incentivization just to keep flogging these belts out. I did one fight once. I was as guilty as everybody. I did Danny Good against Liam Conroy. I think Liam Conroy at the time was 1-12, and Danny Good was 8-2, and Liam Conroy won. Now it's great for Liam that he won that belt, but really, is that it's not really a belt, is it? A belt as such. And there were plenty of those fights that we all did because it sold the show. But when you look back at it, really, should they be there? Not really. I think the Masters belts were they were just for selling goods, but then you devalue. But there's enough crappy belts with WBA, WBC, and IBF and blah 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 that mean nothing. So you're just adding another belt that really doesn't mean anything. An area title is a proper belt, and
Yeah, and John, if you really miss them, they still use them on Bieber shows. You can still get
oh,
a
do they?
Masters belt on a Bieber show.
Do they? Okay. So
um,
that's my view, honestly, and I think that if you did introduce some sort of interim title for kids that had had 4 or 5 fights, and you called it some intermediate title, and it was properly managed, and it was between two kids who really were decent at 4-5-0, then I think that's okay. But it
yeah,
has to be a quality thing that means something, and it's an intermediate fight, maybe with two kids who are in different areas where the area where the area titles are frozen up, where kids that can't fight for an area title could fight for this intermediate title, where the English title's frozen up, and but you tend to use English eliminators for those sort of fights nowadays.
yeah. And the International Masters title, you vacated it the moment you won it.
Yeah, because next week somebody else would fight for it. Now let's be realistic. That's ridiculous, isn't it?
It's hilarious. I love it. Somebody was making money out of that. Good on them.
Mm.
Another one from John. As a registered manager and promoter, how does it feel when you see non-BBBOC licensed managers, in air quotes, on top tables at UK press conferences. Would you like to see the board take action to stop this?
But that's a reference to Sam Jones, isn't it?
Yes.
Because Catterall is officially managed by Lee Eaton. So you've got Sam sitting there being introduced as the manager. Now, really, the first thing should be he should be introduced as his advisor because he's obviously the advisor, not the manager.
Ooh, that's a tainted word these days, isn't it? Nobody
But
uses that.
I know because where it comes from. So I think in reality, boxing is devalued when somebody's been introduced as a manager when they're not a manager. That shouldn't really be happening. But certain people are able to get away with whatever they want to get away with. I've got nothing against Sam Jones, nothing, because I actually got alright with him. And but it's you pay a license fee to be a manager. You go through regulations. You're hauled up before the board for every little misdemeanor that may be coming your way. Why bother to be a manager? Why not just be a pretend one?
Yeah. No, I agree. And it's not against Sam. I chat with Sam relatively
Hmm.
regularly. And Sam actually did get a board license, not as a manager, but I can't remember which one it was, with the intent then of holding it for long
Yeah,
enough to go and get a manager's license.
yeah.
And then I think he fell out with the board or something and maybe had the license revoked. I'm not entirely sure about the detail behind it, but he did it with the best of intentions to go and
Hmm.
get the manager's license. I think somebody like Sam probably thought, well, why do I fucking bother? Why do I bother with the paperwork and the legislation that sits behind it when actually I can just act sort of out of jurisdiction and do what I fancy without the paperwork, which I kind of get. Like, why bother doing it?
I don't blame Sam for it.
No. And if the
The
board aren't going
question
to do
wasn't whether I
anything,
blame Sam, it's whether I blame the whole system.
mm,
So the question is, I do blame the system, and but it's what it is. I don't know how it all works, but you do think, Sam, you're not his manager. Well, maybe what it is Lee Eaton has the license, but let Sam manage him under his license, which I presume is what's really going on. But then you really are then going to the board. We're taking the pee out of you here because Lee's not really the manager. I am, and you can do nothing about it.
well, Sam sat at the press conference table saying that he's the reason that Josh Taylor's getting the best financial deal he sort of got in his career, I think it was, or certainly better than what he was offered in the first instance, and Jack's getting a huge paid. He was sat saying all of this. So he's doing the management side of the job without the license. So how that then works with board contracts and such like on the back of it, I've
Well,
literally got no idea.
I presume they do a divvy up with Lee, and Lee signs the paperwork.
Yeah, but as you say, they're sort of blatantly waving it in the board's face, and the board don't do anything about it. So that's on the board to solve. It's not on Sam to solve.
Totally agree.
Um, but yeah, sort of the one that always confuses me about it is that after the fight, when you see him in the ring, Sam Jones say with the fighters, is that I thought you're not meant to be in the ring unless you hold a board license. I've no idea. I don't get that one at all. Um, but
Yeah,
again, it's not on Sam. I don't blame him for any of it. It's
he's
entirely
just working. He's working the system.
yeah. Final questions from Aaron Shahal. 2025, all three major UK TV deals expire for boxing. Where does Steve see each promoter and each network at the end of these deals? Oh, that's an
Hmm.
interesting. Do you reckon they'll shuffle around?
Okay, it's really hard to know because you don't see what's going on behind the scenes. Let's deal with each one individually. So let's deal with, shall we start with, let's start with Sky. The product's getting better. They're definitely making inroads into a better product. The show in March is fantastic. Not knowing it, Ben Shalom has not had some good press. You've got the Billy Joe Saunders thing. You've got the thing.
We're going to come
So,
on to the other thing in a minute.
oh, okay. You got the other thing. So obviously, Sky, I presume, would not be happy. His contract is up. So Sky will make a decision as to whether they want to renew Ben Shalom's contract or not. But it's common knowledge that his contract's up at some point um, in the near future. So Sky have got to decide if Ben Shalom is going to be the face of Sky or whether they're going to do something totally different. Um, there's loads of rumours flying around the boxing industry, loads, some really strange ones, but they are just rumours. So I'm not. But some of it is. I'll tell you one of it off camera in a minute. Some of it's quite would be big thunderbolt through boxing, and it's not good for boxing either, by the way. Um, so Ben Shalom with Sky, I don't know. That's going to be down to Sky. If they continue with Ben and in the current format, then Ben will have the job. So that's but Sky know what they're going to do, and Ben and they would know between them. I don't think so far he's been an unrivaled success, but he's learning, right? He's come from nowhere really to get the job, and he's made some serious errors. So whether Sky bear with him and go, he's learning his job, we're keeping, will mould him, or whether they decide to cut ties, only they know. Frank Warren with BT Sport, they seem to be with the Saudi deal going from strength to strength. So, well, it's not BT Sport now, is it? It's TNT. They seem to be the biggest players, and they're getting. So I'd imagine TNT are delighted with what they're getting out of it at the moment, with the pay-per-views in the um,
Although that's very fluid, isn't it? So the Joshua and Garnu one is on Sky
Sky
Sports.
Sports, but that's only because of the connection with obviously Joshua. But the rest of it,
I thought Joshua was a DAZN shareholder and on DAZN for
yeah,
life.
no,
So
what's that
I'm
about?
confused by all of it.
What's that about? So maybe that's the agreement that they've gone on to an independent platform. Don't really know. I mean, Sky want pay-per-view stars, and the big worry about the Sky contract is that they're signing the Acolis, the Boatsis. They're not pay-per-view stars, and Sky want pay-per-view. They've only got Ben Whittaker, in my opinion. So they're not developing pay-per-view stars. So that doesn't really support Sky's real intent with boxing. That's what they want, the pay-per-view stars. So that's really interesting. Could it be that Eddie Hearn is making a playback for Sky? Who knows? I don't know. I mean, why are they putting Joshua back in? Who knows? But as it stands, I think Warren with TNT is a pretty done deal going forward. I'd imagine that stays there. Eddie Hearn with DAZN depends on how great their subscription base is, how much money they're winning or losing. I don't think any of us know. If it's a commercial success, Eddie Hearn will stay there. He's the best promoter out there. And he will continue. If it's not really work, if there are problems underneath, maybe he'll try and make a playback for Sky. Who knows? But it's very difficult for me to. I don't know any information any more than anybody else knows. You hear things, but you don't know. So I would imagine the interesting one is going to be Sky
Yeah.
because
Yeah, no, I agree.
there's a lot of people at Sky that do a lot of the work that aren't the face of Sky.
Yeah.
It's so yeah. I just don't know. That's the interesting one.
And a final question again from Aaron Chahal on Facebook, which touches on what you're just talking about there. Boxer times Mazar Majid. So those that don't know about Mazar Majid, go and Google him. He's got a colourful background. Why aren't your boxing news, again in air quotes, and other respected outlets, for example, talking about it? Is it a taboo, how MTK was? Accusations, I need to be careful how I word this, accusations, nothing proven, of bags of tens of thousands of cash are wild. Yet Boxer haven't fielded any questions about it, just a pre-planned speech on their chosen media partner of Talk Sport. It's like the old days of Hearn clarifying drug tests on IFL.
It's a really good point. It's a really good point. I think I don't think it's a good look, is it? It's not a good look when newspapers come out and say there's money exchanged in paper bags. And the defense is that that's how business was done. It's all been accounted for, blah, 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 blah. My experience in business generally is if you're giving somebody £80,000, you normally do it by bank transfer. I don't think there's really a logical reason for going to the bank to draw out £80,000 and put it in a carrier bag and paying somebody in that way. That doesn't really make any sense from how you would expect a business to run. The reason that they dealt with him apparently is he's the advisor to Boatsi, another one of these advisors again. Again, not knowing anything, and I'm just talking as a boxing fan, you read it and think that's a bit odd or very odd. But obviously, It's Sky, and Sky represented, and their name was dragged through the newspapers, and that may be how they do business. They account for the 80,000 in cash. They draw the 80,000 in cash out of the bank and present it in cash to somebody, and they sign for it in cash. Very unusual business practice nowadays.
If if any story is going to start with Mazar Majid, then again, red flags all over it. Purely because of the background that he's got and his sporting integrity. I would have question marks about it. When that story descends into £80,000 bags of cash being handed about, then there's alarm bells all over the place about it. Not saying anyone's done anything wrong, not saying there's any issue. Maybe it's all absolutely fine and above board. But what I don't like, what I'm uncomfortable about, is that nobody talks about it and nobody is allowed to be pressed on it and nobody comes out and directly takes the questions on it.
Why do you think that is? Because what I don't understand is there's so much going on in boxing at the moment, so much. And that I'm looking at and thinking, really? Really? And you're looking at it and thinking, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. That doesn't make sense. And you can see things going, this isn't right. This doesn't make sense. And I'm pretty sure I know what's happening, but nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about it.
No, and those things that you're talking about, I can guarantee that I think the same things. Um, and to me, it comes down to the independent press not really giving any sort of attention to boxing. It very rarely happens. The Times article about Majid was one of the rare times that boxing sort of makes any real headlines within sort of any sports papers really, outside of a Fury and Joshua fight. And is not for the right reasons. We've had the Panorama documentary recently on the BBC talking about all the wrongdoings that allegedly happened within the sport. Have they gone away? Again, without having real interrogation of it and people that are willing to ask the questions, you still see the same faces that were sort of linked to the problems 5 years ago. That's my issue with it all. The same names, same faces, and you add in a couple of new ones here and there. That's my concern about everything. And there was sort of, when you see certain fighters end up on certain cards, you think something's not right
But
still.
nobody questions it. I know, we know, but it just carries on a bit, and everybody's just sort of gets on with it. And I think the people don't want to ask questions because they're all making so much money out of it.
Yeah.
Um, and
And the
even
only
look
boxing
at
outlets really that are out there with sort of putting a camera in people's face are the ones that are potentially compromised by some of it anyway. I say no.
or even microphones to them. Doesn't have to be cameras. It's some of the sort of stuff's been going on in that department. I'm thinking, no, this is a bit odd. But anyway, yeah, there's a lot more to it, and things that I wouldn't say openly. You can't, but then there's a lot of funny stuff going on.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Before we land ourselves in any hot water, that will do us for the week. We'll be back next week when we're going to start previewing these upcoming March shows because there's loads to preview. Shows that have accidentally become far better than they were originally planned to be. Shows that were originally planned to be brilliant that are still brilliant. So we've got loads to talk about with those and run through
Fantastic.
the stable. So, Steve, I will speak to you next week. We'll
Cheers,
catch
Mark.
up. Less recording issues. Thank